Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Got a nice email back from Global Whiskey. They seem to be quite happy with one's review. So yeah, everything's wonderful, isn't it? So on to this week's episode of the show. I mean, I was looking around sort of at the groupings of samples that I've got here in the study and thinking, what do I fancy doing, and I thought, you know what, I haven't ever done an episode of the show on Glenturret, and yeah, obviously I've got a nice little group of samples that I had sitting here for a while, so a big thank you to the current distributors, Axiom Brands, for the samples, or for three of the samples anyway, for today's episode of the show. As you can see, the other three have been made up of historic single cask bottlings from the likes of AD Rattray, Douglas Laing, and Blackadder. Blackadder, where have they disappeared to? That's certainly a sort of a name from the past, shall we say. In actual fact, that particular sample, I think, dates back to, let me quickly find my notes, 2006, would you believe? I haven't done any dealings with Robin at Blackadder for a number of years, as they stopped sending samples like a lot of the independents did. Anyway, that's by the by. I thought it would be interesting to have a bit of a look at Glenturret, because it's how should we put it? It's kind of a bit of a funny one, I think. For a start, the distillery itself claims that it's the oldest in Scotland and was founded in 1773, which is frankly a load of old Tosh, really. Basically, they claim it was founded on the site of an illegal still in a place called the Hosh. Of course, now the thing is, with illegal distilling, they didn't exactly advertise the fact that they were illegally distilling, we'll call it whiskey, although it was something a bit rougher, I think. So any distillery in Scotland can claim that, they were built on the site of a former illegal still and what have you. And of course, no one's going to go, talking rubbish, because obviously there might be some anecdotal sort of history, but nothing was ever obviously written down. So, but it does generally sort of, or has been generally discounted, this whole being founded in 1775, because apparently the distilling, or legal distilling, shall we say, didn't begin in that particular area until 1818, when a chap called John Drummond took out an official license to distill spirits, and even then it wasn't actually called the Glenturret Distillery. The actual current distillery, I believe, wasn't founded until 1875. I mean, prior to that there was a distillery called Glenturret operating sometime around 1850, but that kind of disappeared off the face of Scotland at some stage. So the reality is that the current distillery really wasn't founded until 1875, which was 100 years after it claims to have been founded. But anyway, history, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day if a distillery is kind of being a bit, shall we say, unforthcoming about or playing fast and loose with its history. Does that mean that the distillery plays fast and loose with everything else? Well, let's talk about the juice. I mean, because at the end of the day, like I said, what really matters at the end of the day is the juice. And when I first started in the whiskey industry 20 odd years ago, Glenturret was bottled as a 10-year-old. It was pleasant, nice. It wasn't, the sort of whiskey that would set your pants on fire, shall we say, but there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. In actual fact, you could say that it was, fully signed up member of, or shall we say, fully adhered to the Goodrum first law of whiskey, which is pretty distillery equals pretty whiskey. And, you can't say that, the Glenturret Distillery isn't a pretty looking distillery. And certainly over the years, this 10-year-old, the quality of said 10-year-old, really took an absolute nosedive. It started to become worse and worse until Edrington, the then owners, pulled the plug on it in 2015. Now, of course, obviously, they didn't say, we'll pull the plug on this 10-year-old because the quality is rubbish now. Oh no, the marketing monkeys were in full flow, and it was like, oh, age statements are also passé now. It's all no age statements, darling, don't you know? And so everything went no age statement, and age statements have obviously, as you well know, crept back into fashion. You know, it's kind of, you know, everything's cyclical at the end of the day. And the question, I suppose, is why did the quality of the Glenturret 10-year-old suffer so much? And I think the answer is the famous grouse. Now, as you know, the famous grouse is a huge blend owned by Edrington, and basically the bulk of the production of Glenturret was siphoned off to go into the famous grouse. Now, when you're a small distillery producing about, what, 200,000, 250,000 litres of alcohol a year, it doesn't leave an awful lot to be bottled as a single malt, really, does it? And I personally think, like a lot of distilleries, funnily enough owned by Edrington, that they wanted to maximise production. And now the only way you really maximise production at a distillery is either enlarge a distillery, which obviously in this instance it was not possible to do so, so you have to therefore tinker with your production. So it basically means a quicker fermentation, it means a quicker distillation, it means a wider cut, more end spirit. And I think this is essentially what's happened to Glenturret, and the quality started to turn, well, it became bloody cardboardy at the end of the day, too fainty, too sulphury, and either it wasn't being left long enough in the casks because of the extra sulphur, or the casks they're using weren't active enough. But funnily enough, they did begin to use a lot more sherry casks, I hasten to add. Now, I wonder why that is. Ooh! Anyway, so, you know, this pretty little 10-year-old turned into a bit of a mongrel, really, it has to be said, by the time of its death. And like I said, the whole reasoning being is because I think they really were forcing those stills and trying to maximise the amount of usable spirit that they were producing. Now, as you well know, 2018, I think it was 2018, certainly a few years after that happened, the distillery was sold to a French group. I think they're called Art and Terroir, and I think they're partially owned, or they're Laing, the sort of decanter glass maker company, you know, high-end glass making company, is part of the group that owns it. So obviously, the distillery is no longer sort of branded as the famous grouse experience. I'm assuming that obviously it still supplies juice to the famous grouse and to obviously to Edrington, one assumes. But obviously it's going to take some time before we get to a point where we can sort of safely assume we are in the post-Edrington bottling time. I mean, obviously there is a no-age statement bottling, which is the first one we'll be looking at, called the Triple Wood, which, you know, might actually just about have some post-Edrington spirit in there, possibly. So it'll be interesting to see whether that is quite as rough as the old 10-year-old was. So yeah. Now, so in the sort of the current sort of distillery lineup, there is this the no age statement bottling. There is a 12-year-old which is heavily sherried, combination of American oak and sherry, but I think there's a fair amount of sherry goes into that. So to sort of delve into, you know, the style of the spirit, obviously I'm looking at 3 independent bottlings which are considerably older, and all, as far as I can remember, are all ex-bourbon casks, so should give us a really nice indication of what the spirit was like back then in the day. Yeah, so don't think there's an awful lot else to say apart from let's have a quick look at today's lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with what is called the Triple Wood. Now, each year they do a release of the triple wood, the 10-year-old peated, the 12-year-old, and all the other bottlings, I believe. So this is the 2022 release. It's bottled at 43%, and the spirit has been aged in a selection of European and American sherry casks and ex-bourbon barrels. So it'll be interesting to see. Like I said, probably, where are we looking at? What sort of, yeah, it's possible we could be on the cusp of some post-Edrington spirit in this particular bottling, obviously because it has no age statement, and so we'll see what that's all about. Obviously the 12-year-old is definitely Edrington era spirit. This is actually bottled at 46%, and like I said, it is a selection of European and American oak casks, so predominantly I believe sherried, but we will obviously find that out when we get to it. Then we're going to look at the first of the three independent bottlings. This is an AD Rattray individual cask bottling of a 25-year-old Glenturret. It's a single bourbon hogshead, 891, was distilled in December of 1988, bottled in January of 2014 at 45.3%. Yep, I do have a lot of old samples knocking around, waiting for their moment in the limelight, as they say. The next one, again, is another quite old bottling. This is a 27-year-old, bottled by Douglas Laing in their old particular range. This was a refill bourbon hoggy, and the code was DL11092, distilled in December of 1988 again, and this time was bottled in March of 2016. Then we're going to move on to the oldest of the three independent bottlings. So this is the Blackadder Raw Cask 1978 27-year-old. Bourbon cask number 354, distilled in March of 78 and bottled in July of 2005. Now, one of the wonderful things I used to love about the Blackadder range is the fact that they all had, every bottling in the raw cask range had little bits of cask in the bottom. Now, of course, as we well know, it would have actually had a raw filtration to make sure, well, all whiskey that's non-chill filtered will have some form of filtering, just to make sure all the bits don't get in there. So we know that they used to sort of hand put the bits in there, just to sort of give it that authentic kind of touch, which always I thought was wonderful, to be honest with you. But the real interesting thing about about having these bits of wood floating around was when you shook the bottle, you could see it all floating around, and you could see all the natural oils and how it was held in suspension. Absolutely fascinating stuff, and you know, so that you could sort of show customers exactly what filtration and all that kind of stuff does to your whiskey. I assume Blackadder are still bottling. I hope they still are, because they did bottle some absolutely stunning whiskies over the years, and hopefully this is one of them. And finally, we're ending on a bit of peat. Yes, indeed, as you well know, the Glenturret does make a peated malt. Called Ruad Moir, and that term is only ever used in independence. So the distillery itself just calls it the 10-year-old peat smoked. So quite interesting. Again, this was the 2022 release, bottled at 46%, and it's been aged in a combination of first and second fill European and American oak. So always nice to finish with a little bit of peat. So yeah, that's this week's lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of triple wood then, shall we? Right, okay, so let's see what the triple wood gives us. It's a little hard, austere possibly. There's some beeswax, some malt, touch of sherry, touch of dried fruits, green apple. It's a little cardboardy note. I mean, it's not, it is a bit hard, you know, it's not beautiful and lovely, you know, it's kind of, well, workmanlike, I suppose, would be, you know, one word to use for it. I mean, it's not rough and ready, but it certainly doesn't have the charm that the old 10-year-old used to have. But, you know, it is what it is. If this has got some post-Egrington spirit, then it's not as rough as it has been, and maybe they have cleaned up the spirit since then. I hope so. I mean, it's not unheard of. Tobermory have certainly done it, or well appear to have done it. So, yeah, in comes a new regime, new broom, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's see what the pal's like. It's a bit rough, rougher than the nose would suggest, it has to be said. Quite spicy though, and the finish is quite nice and spicy. More sherry on the palate, more sort of raisinated fruit, dried fruits. Again, a little bit of hard barley, some cardboard, burnt wood. It's not exactly what you'd call a charming spirit, it has to be said. It frankly needs the sherry at the end of the day. It's short. It's a bit kind of, like I say, there's a nice spiciness, but it's short. It's kind of like, well, yeah, right, okay. It kind of really sort of just sort of leaves you wanting sort of something a bit longer and with a bit more, dare I say, a little bit more quality. I mean, you know, being a bit harsh. I mean, it has its good points, but it has its negative points as well, as far as I can see. So, yeah. Let's move on. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 12-year-old. So 46% European and American oak. Sherry. So I think we can safely say European and American oak sherry seasoned casks, I think, because it's a sherry monster at the end of the day. Raisinated fruits, dates, walnut, prune. Got a rye-like kind of character coming through, sort of, you know, that kind of slightly youthful herbal rye spice, a bit of dark honey, beeswax. Again, there's a little hardness there behind all of the sort of the oak character. But it's the oak that's mainly in control here. I mean, it is what it is at the end of the day. It's okay. There's no sulphury notes. There's no overt sort of like sherry sulphur. I mean, again, like I said, the spirit is a little bit on the hard side, which is not a surprise. Let's see what the pal's like. Very much like the nose, very sherry influenced, dark raisinated fruits, malt, dark honey-ish, a little bit of beeswax again that sort of slightly sort of industrial feel to the mid palate. Again, I'm getting that kind of sort of rye-likey kind of spice on the aftertaste, and an almost kind of bran flake kind of note as well. It is what it is at the end of the day. It's not the most charming of whiskies. It's okay, it's pleasant, it's heavily sherried. If you like this kind of style, then obviously it will appeal to you. If you're not a huge sherry fanatic, then obviously it isn't. Yeah, it's okay, shall we say. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the independent bottlings. So this is the 80 Rattray 25-year-old. I mean, you know, these days, I look at the lists from independent bottling companies, and they don't bottle anything with this kind of age anymore. And even if they did, it would be bottled in their luxury end of the range, whatever it's called, And would they send out samples? I mean, back in the day, I mean, this is back in what, 2014, and they were quite happily sending me a sample of a 25-year-old. Would they do it now? No, not a hope in hell's chance. And this is one of the reasons why I've kept so many of these samples, is because I know at the end of the day, you know, I'm probably never going to get the opportunity ever again. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Quite manurey, quite straw-like, damp straw. But it's got some lovely mature American oak, that sawdusty American oak. Again, there is a little bit of a cardboardiness to it, but that cardboardy note is kind of a, is it because I'm searching for it? It is not, it's kind of lost a little bit in the sort of like the sawdusty oak, a little bit of herbal barley. I mean, that's a lovely nose at the end of the day. I mean, it's kind of very much Glenturret with age. It doesn't appear to be the most beautiful of spirits, but you know, it's like, you know, any old dog, stick it in the cask for long enough, you know, and let it get on with it. Yeah, I mean, it's again pleasant. I mean, it's not sort of like going to sort of wow you. It's not going to sort of like go, oh my god, this is the most amazing thing I've ever tasted in my life. But it is beautifully mature. I haven't got a clue what it retailed for back in the day, but comfortably 3 figures, obviously. Would I have comfortably paid 3 figures for it? Probably not. It's definitely sort of raw is not the word, manurey, sort of damp straw, that kind of thing. Interesting. Let's see the pass one. Softer, cleaner, fuller, lovely length. Some honeyed notes coming through on the finish. That's actually quite a pleasant mouthful, actually. Lots of sawdusty oak, touch of marzipan, barley, straw, less manure, less earth, less funk. So it's a little bit more sort of straightforward. I mean, it's not the sort of most complex of spirits, but it has matured really, really well. Lovely sawdusty finish as well. That lovely mature American oak character just keeps, you know, rolling along. I like that. The palate I thought was, you know, really very, very good. The nose I could kind of like live without, but the palate was certainly quite impressive. Right, okay, so on to the second of the independent bottlings. This is the Douglas Laing 27-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Again, in a very similar area. It's got that kind of damp straw character. There's a little bit of boiled sweets, that sort of slightly high-toned Tosh-y kind of boiled sweets, rose petal. Certainly doesn't feel as old as the AD Rattray. I'm not getting that sort of dusty American oak character. There's a little bit of wood smoke, a little bit of herbalness. I mean, the spirit kind of smells old, if you get what I mean, but it doesn't feel as old as the AD Rattray, mainly because of the sort of, like I said, it doesn't quite have that sawdusty American oak character. In fact, there's more spirit character, and it's not bad. Again, it's kind of very much in the similar kind of style to the AD Rattray. Pleasant, interesting. So that's right. Touch more oak on the palate. It's just very weird kind of perfumey sort of note happened right on the sort of right in the mid palate, which is just like thrown everything kind of off kilter to a certain extent. But aside from that, it's quite malty, it's pleasant. Again, there's a little bit more oak character. There's some pleasant dried fruits, almost kind of verging on the cognac-y. Can't get rid of this weird perfumey note though, which is kind of, yeah, getting in the way of things. Maybe the sample is showing a little bit of tiredness, possibly. That's a distinct possibility. So overall, I would have to say, again, it's in a sort of similar kind of style to the AD Rattray bottling. So it'd be interesting to see whether the kind of the Blackadder bottling kind of follows the same course or not. Right, okay, so on to the Blackadder 27-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Sort of. Yes, there's definitely straw notes, straw-like barley. It's got quite a sort of green fruit youthfulness, to be honest with you. It's got that kind of green apple, gooseberry, that sort of more of a kind of a spey kind of sort of character. Obviously, I know Glenturret's a Highland, but a touch of lime, lemon curd. Yeah, definitely lemon curd. A little bit of oak. Again, not a great deal of oak character. Certainly not got the sawdusty oak character of the AD Rattray bottling. But again, we're in a sort of similar kind of style with that sort of straw-like kind of barley character. And so it goes to show that obviously Glenturret can mature quite pleasantly. Seems to work best when it's got a little bit more oak character. But, you know, that wasn't too shabby. Let's see the palate. Actually, I think that's probably the nicest of the three on the palate-wise. Lovely softness, juiciness. But this is an elevated green fruit, green citrus, gooseberry, green apple. It's giving it a lovely vibrancy. Again, it's not particularly complex. There's a little bit of apricot, possibly. Bit of custard powder, possibly. But again, not a huge amount of oak input. Talking of the, I don't know whether you can quite see that from the bottom there, but even in this miniature, they've actually sprinkled a little bit of old wood. That I think is possibly, to me, the best of the three independent bottlings. Although I think they each have their sort of interesting sort of quirk to them. Possibly the AD Rattray felt the oldest because of the sort of the mature oak character coming through it, and the other two not having quite so much oak. But I think sort of spirit character wise, I thought the Blackadder was pretty bloody good. Okay, so on to the final whisky of the afternoon. This is the 10-year-old Peat Smoked. Let's see what the nose gives on this thing, shall we? A lot of peat. I mean, I would say that we are certainly up here with sort of Ardbeg level of peatiness. We're certainly at least 50 parts per million, because it's reeks of peat. I mean, earthy, herbal, slightly medicinal, a little bit of vanilla, some dried fruit, citrus. No distillery character whatsoever. Is that a bad thing? One asks the question. Is this the best way to deal with Glenturret? Peat the hell out of it. No, it's a good nose. I like it. I mean, it is okay. It is one-dimensional. It's heavy peat, but it has its place. Like I say, it's quite herbal. There's a sort of quite pleasant, oily sort of marzipan note happening. A little bit of dried fruit. So yeah. I mean, I think of the three distillery releases, this is certainly the most interesting of the three, I think. Anyway, let's see what the powers are. Full, earthy, slightly medicinal, lots of barbecued meat, barbecued sauce, quite dry, quite herbal on the mid palate, dried fruits, sherry, dried fruits, some spice, good length, but it's basically the peat returning with that sort of barbecuey sauce kind of character, charred wood, a little bit of tar as well. Again, we're not talking huge amounts of, well, practically no distillery character really. At the end of the day, it's peat and wood, which, yeah, you're not going to go wrong with them. Certainly when it has that lovely kind of barbecue sauce kind of character, then yep, that certainly ticks my my boxes, it has to be said. That's lovely. I really like that. Maybe that's what Glenturret should do. Just go peated malt, full stop. You know. No, honestly, I think if yeah, praise where praise is due. It's obviously that back in the day, the quality of the spirit was a lot higher. I mean, you know, the three independent bottlings, you know, were by and large pretty good. It has to be said. Anyway, I'm kind of wrapping up before I've got to the end, haven't I? So, right, let's wrap this up properly then, shall we? Okay, so the triple wood. It's not my favoured bottling of Glenturret, has to be said. If that does have some post Edrington spirit in it, I'm hoping that they have indeed kind of like just gone back to basics and gone sort of, look, we don't need to basically push these stills so hard. We don't need to take such a wider cut. We need to sort of concentrate more on a clean spirit. And yeah, okay, there is a sort of a little bit of cardboardiness in the triple wood, but it's certainly not what it once was. So, you know, fingers crossed that, you know, the distillery is now heading in the right direction. The 12-year-old, well, yeah, it's heavily sherry influenced at the end of the day, and if you like that kind of style, you'll like it. If you don't, you don't. And to me, it doesn't really do an awful lot for me, it has to be said. The 80 Rattray bottling, like I said, it goes to show that back in the day, Glenturret was producing a clean and a quite pleasant spirit, which certainly has the propensity to age. Give it a little bit of relatively active oak, and it just develops this lovely sawdusty note. You know, I know the distillery does bottle, I think it's a 21 or 25 or something like that. It's probably horrendously expensive and probably features a lot of sherry, but I don't know. I didn't get sent samples of those kind of things. But it does go to show that, you know, if Glenturret can kind of get itself back on track, which I dare say it probably will do, it could release bottlings quite like that. And yeah, that wasn't too bad at all. Same with the Hunter Laing bottling, or Douglas Laing bottling. I mean, yeah, all right, there was this weird kind of perfumed-y kind of note on the mid palate, which possibly might be the fact that the sample has degraded a little bit, but so, you know, giving it the benefit of the doubt and assuming that is indeed the case, very similar to the AD Rattray bottling with not quite so much oak. And the Blackadder bottling, again, just showing you that sort of, you know, Glenturret was producing, you know, some good quality spirit back in the day, which did certainly age, and this had more of a kind of spey kind of character to it. It's a wonderful thing about single cask bottlings, although overall you could sort of see the DNA amongst all three. They all had their own kind of unique nuances. And the peat smoked, well, like I said, of all the three distillery releases, I think certainly my favoured. I mean, obviously, like I said, the taste of barbecued smoked meat, well, yeah, you ain't going to get me complaining about that. I like my barbecued smoked meat. So yes, it's like chocolate, isn't it? You know, if I love my chocolate, and if I get a sort of a lovely whiskey that sort of, you know, has this wonderful dark chocolate character, then I'm in heaven. So, you know, barbecued smoked meat, yeah, love it. So yeah, it's always nice to finish on a high point. And, you know, okay, so it has, Glenturret overall has its pluses and it has its minuses at the end of the day. Now, as you well know, I have my sort of, you know, grading of distilleries, and it's a D+, I think. It's not quite bad enough to be lumped in with the axis of evil, and it's a case of whether time will tell whether it can sort of haul itself up to a C rating. I don't honestly know, so D+ is sort of what I would give it as an overall rating. firm but fair, I think. Anyway, I don't think I'll be getting sort of pats on the backs and sort of plaudits from the distillery about this week's episode of the show. But hopefully you think it's been a fair appraisal, and it's certainly not exactly. I'm not damning the distillery. I'm just hoping that it's back onto a sort of like a less industrial path, shall we say. Anyway, until next week, hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the show. All that's left to say is good afternoon and good ramming.